We will probably return to Yoga Sutras a little bit later, and now we would talk about the inception of such a teaching as Tantra. Tantra emerged around the same period at the beginning of Common Era. The thing is that the very question of inception of such a teaching as Tantra is a very complex and ambiguous one. Some scholars refer Tantra as a pre-Vedic period teaching which leads to Dravidic roots. Others think that it incepted in this very period of the beginning of the Common Era. I think that there are two aspects of Tantra that should be treated separately. From one side we have the ecstatic experiences, the experiences of the global feminine, which is archetypical to all the nations and peoples and has its roots in the most ancient antiquity. And another aspect of Tantra is the intellectual teaching, but the intellectual teaching couldn't appear in the very ancient antiquity, for it requires intellectuals. Therefore, I think that the emergence of such a complex teaching as Tantra is linked to the emergence of the University of Nalanda, the great educational institution of its time. In fact, right after the death of Buddha, in the state Bihar, appeared the first Buddhist university. It existed for 1,200 years. And just for comparison, the oldest modern university, like Sorbonne, is about 900 years old. And at that time, about 2,000 years ago, at the Nalanda University there studied 10,000 students. Just imagine the scale of this university at that period, 10,000. The quantity of golden horde which conquered Central and Eastern Europe was 25,000, and here we have 10,000 students. And this university produced a powerful intellectual elite. Moreover, it was one of the periods of proliferation of India. And any rise in social proliferation usually leads to the thickening of intellectual layer. When the situation is stable, when people have the ability to think, when there is a room for communications. Let's be honest and mention that the Hindu tradition is not some kind of Brahmins who just sit in their caves and teach a bunch of students. The great contributions were made by the kings who gathered the Brahmavakyas, the disputes of scholars. These are the schools, the Gurukulas, among which the scholars moved from one to the other. There was a tradition of scholarly council to approve the scholarly treatises. There was a tradition of rewriting, so it's a huge intellectual tradition. So what we see now in India are just the remnants of that huge and great intellectual tradition that once was there. So one of the epicenters of that tradition was the Nalanda University. From one side it was the undoubtedly Buddhist university. But from the other side, when intellectuals start thinking something over, they usually derive on quite non-canonical conclusions. So around this university there started appearing a tradition which crossed the borders of traditional dogmas. All those whom we call Mahasiddhas, from either Buddhist or Tantric traditions, were somehow linked, connected to this very university. One of the first tantric practitioners, who is undoubtedly the mythological figure, the Saraha, or more correctly put, Sharaha, the arrow, for he has the attribute of arrow. He has a very interesting life story. He was a traditional Brahman from the Brahman family, but he loved the woman of the lower caste, the blacksmith's daughter. And not only he loved her, not only they had sexual relations, but he also considered her to be his teacher, which was completely unacceptable for any Brahman. He was a very famous scholar, and when the people came into distemper and came to him to figure out what had happened, he addressed the people's confusion with so-called the Song of Saraha, which had the following meaning. Do you really think that all your rituals are somewhat beneficial? The inner experience is truly beneficial, and not from the external rituals. The feelings lead us to liberation and not take it away from us. So he created the whole new discourse, which was repeated by tantrics in this or that way. In the other part of India, at approximately the same period, plus minus 300 years, there emerges another text, which is considered to be one of the bases of modern Tantra and undoubtedly the basis of so-called Kashmir Shaivism tradition. This text is called Shiva Sutras. It's an absolutely amazing text, firstly because it's improbably short. It consists of several dozens of lines, and each line consists of 2, 3, or no more than 4 words. I call this text the Manifesto of Intellectual Mystic. When you read Shiva Sutras, there appears a feeling that this is no mere religious mysticism. It's in no way the marketplace mysticism. It has nothing to do with ecstatic mysticism. These are the insights of the deep intellectual who had thought throughout all his life and was very sophisticated on reflecting of his own thinking processes. He had put his thoughts extremely concisely, which allows us to experience this text as a meditative text. By the way, when I talked about Yoga Sutra, I didn't mention what is the sutra genre in its essence. The thing is that sutra in Sanskrit means the thread, and sutras are short statements which are linked with each other with logical thread. In fact, sutras are a kind of brief summary, looking at which you could remember some basic elements. Either it is a summary for the tutor, or it is a summary for the student who had written it briefly after the tutor to think it over once again later. Or it is a summary which is given to some other person to think it over by himself. So this is the kind of genre. Yoga Sutras are very short sutras, but Shiva Sutras are even shorter. Each of them is the depository of some deep understanding. I have written here some of my favorite sutras. Maybe they fall out from the thread of context in some way, but these are enough to understand the worldview of the author of Shiva Sutras. Surely in mythological way it's considered to be written on stone which was found somewhere and somehow, but of course I don't believe in such things. And I think that there was a very wise man who expressed the very deep and beautiful thoughts. By the way, this picture is the cover of Shiva Sutras translated into Russian by the very famous Sanskrit scholar the Oleg Yerchenkov, so now it's also available in Russian. For example, Shiva Sutra starts with the following phrase: Chaitanya Matmanam. The root is chit, to think, and Chaitanya is an abstract noun derived from the verb to think, so it means rationality, reasonableness is divine. So where are we looking for God? The very fact that we are reasonable, rational, is the end of searching. There is nothing further to look for. This is the main miracle of the universe. The very fact of thinking, of self-consciousness, that is it. At least I understand this line this way. The next fascinating line is Jnanam Bandhanam. Knowledge chains. But why knowledge is chains? Knowledge is chains for the same reason for which Patanjali had written Pramana as the first vritti. Because any local knowledge gives you the feeling of undoubtedness and avoids you from thinking of something over its limits. That's why knowledge is chains, which is understandable for an intellectual. You always strive to know something more than you know now. The tomorrow's knowledge destroys the knowledge of today. You know more than you did, and that's the reason for you to live. Shiva Sutra directly mentions the word yoga. Surprising are the stages of yoga. In the original text, the root has is used, which means to laugh, to smile. That is, the new steps makes you laugh and smile. Each new step in understanding the reality makes one say to himself, "This is so interesting! I haven't known so much! I have discovered something new, and that is amazing!" Most people are afraid to discover something new, and they are trying to keep their current state. But that's in vain. There is nothing greater than discovering something new and making new steps. And the next line, which I wrote in one of my books, even before I knew the Shiva Sutras, concerns the fact that we feed our mental body with new knowledge. But that was already written in Shiva Sutras. Jnanam Annam. Knowledge is food. In fact, in the same way as we feed our physical body with new food, we feed our emotional body with new experiences and emotions. Alike, we feed our mental body with new ideas, with new concepts. Otherwise, our mental state would be very poor. The modern research also proves that when brain stops getting conceptually new information, it gets older very fast. So one must not only read the news feed from some social network, but also feed oneself with conceptually new ideas. The next line, Shariram Yajnam, body is the sacrifice. Why so? For gaining new knowledge and experience, we sacrifice the days of our lives. So body is the sacrifice which we offer on the altar of our own experience. Sometimes we offer it without gaining new experience, sometimes we offer and then we know that yes, we spent this time, but now we understand something more. So this is the main sacrifice for one to offer. So not the sacrifice of the goat as in Vedic period, or not the sacrifice of flowers in Ganga as nowadays, but we sacrifice our bodies on our own experiential altar. We sacrifice our lives, our feelings, to gaining some new conceptual knowledge. Just consider how deep is this. Gurur upayaho. Guru is the method. And again, this statement looks strange. From perspective of Vedic times, Guru appears as some kind of undoubted truth. As he told, so you did, and so on. But in fact, Guru is just a hint. It's no more than a method. The knowledge is the goal. And guru is just a method to achieve this goal. And it's just one of the methods. There are some things which you can know without guru. By Indian scale, it's a renegade statement, but it's quite understandable for an intellectual. It's understandable that you learn from everyone you can, and not only from the person for whom you made some ritual and so on. And totally amazing is the statement Atman Nartaka, the god is the actor, which resembles Shakespeare, but vice versa. The world is theater and people are actors, and everyone plays his own role. But here we have the opposite statement. You are the spectator, and the whole world is the theater, which has some events which involve you, which amaze you, and so on. That's how bright this text is. I brought these statements just as several examples, hoping to amaze and inspire you, and to understand one more stage in history of yoga from the tantra perspective. By the way, there is a text which is a sister of Shiva Sutras, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, although it was written 400 years later, and I would name it the Manifesto of Mystic Hedonist. Lots of techniques which I described there are the techniques of feelings and experiences. Actually, lots of sexual practices are described there, experiencing certain emotional states and grounding on these emotional states, experiencing and knowing oneself. So these were some new ideas brought with the inception of Tantra.